Hi everyone. Before we start this episode, we just wanted to issue a content warning. In this episode, we talk extensively about how suicide and depression is portrayed in Looking for Alaska and in media in general. If you think this may be a trigger for you, then go ahead and skip this episode. You won't be missing out on much by jumping ahead, and we look forward to welcoming you back next time. We want you to know that you're not alone and that help is available if you need it. In the UK, you can contact Samaritans by calling 116 123. And in the US, the number for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-8255. We've included links to both of these organisations in the show notes, as well as a website listing hotlines in dozens of countries around the world. Help is available if you need it. You're not alone. Hello and welcome to Nostalgia's Perspective.
It is.
A podcast where two friends look back on the media which has influenced us. I'm Jay.
Mm-hmm. Was that an actual
Yeah, I'm just going to go into it. Sure, why not? I'm Jay.
And I'm Georgia. And this week we are looking at Looking for Alaska, which was my choice, book by John Green. So we are going to try something a little bit new.
We did it last week episode.
Did we do it?
Yeah.
Did we do it last episode?
Yeah, because you did it. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's still kind of new. So
it's still kind of new.
You weren't wrong.
Okay. Well, we're trying something new, but not that new. Where Jay will describe the synopsis. So please, can you describe for potentially those who haven't read Looking for Alaska?
Sure.
The plot.
Sure, I'll give it a go. So, Looking for Alaska is I want to say 2005 book by John Green about Miles, later nicknamed Pudge, who goes off to boarding school searching for his great perhaps. Basically, he's lived a pretty boring life and he feels like he wants to get more out of it, I think is a fair thing to say. And he goes off and he meets Alaska and the Colonel and Takumi, who they get up to hijinks, and he falls in love with Alaska, and it's about how they shape his life and how his perception of... I don't know, this is where it gets, like, it's such a difficult book to describe without spoiling.
Yeah. It's a character driven book, isn't it? And it's mostly about...
It's a coming of age story. That's what I should have started with, and that's kind of it's a coming of age story for Pudge, and it's an exploration of... God, again, you can't even say it without spoiling, in a way.
I think that we're gonna spoil it along the way.
Yeah, I just didn't want to do it in the synopsis.
Yeah, what we will say is that it's a relatively short book to read.
Yeah.
You know, you can read it in a weekend.
Yeah, you can read it in a day if you're dedicated enough. And you've got the time. Exactly.
So, lockdown, what else have you got to do?
Sure.
Might as well read Looking for Alaska.
Yeah.
Or, if you're even lazier than that, there is a HBO show, which I'm sure we'll touch upon.
Sure. Yeah.
Which I think represents it, it does adaptational changes, but it represents it pretty accurately.
Yeah, it's a very good adaptation.
Yeah. So if you're not into reading and you want to know what the hell we're talking about, go watch it or read it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm going to be very curt today. I can already tell.
That's fine. That's fine. So obviously it was your pick. So did you want to explain a little bit about why you picked it, why it's important to you?
Yes. So I seem to have picked a lot of texts from a certain period of time. Which
it's our teenage years, isn't it?
Yeah, it's our teenage years, and it's late teenage years. And I think for me, when I first, this was it the first John Green book? I can't decide whether I read The Fault in Our Stars or I read Looking for Alaska first.
Yeah.
I might have read Alaska first.
Yeah. I know that I read Alaska first because I bought the box set of his 5 at the time, and I bought it for The Fault in Our Stars.
Yeah.
But I was like, no, I'm going to read all the others first, which is a way to do it. I don't think it's the right way to do it, but
it is a way.
Yes, because I think Alaska's a hard one to start with in a way, and then you have Catherine's, and so. But yeah, sorry.
No, that's fine.
It's the first one you read.
Yeah, I think it was the first one I read, and I went into it completely blind, and I immediately really loved Alaska as a character.
Right.
And I think at that period of time, I bought into all of the bull that she spews, you know? Like,
sure.
And everything that Pudge believes about her, and like even from like my point of view, she was the kind of sort of person that I'm definitely not. But in my head, my 17-year-old self really kind of wanted to be.
Yeah. It's that like heady, philosophical, ideological kind of teenager.
Yes.
That is very appealing to a certain kind of teenager.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She's well read, and she's carefree, and yeah, she disregards her own like well-being, but in a kind of way that just seems very freeing and all of this. And so when the big thing happens, and big spoilers.
Yeah, this is where from this point on we're spoiling now. Yeah.
Yeah, from this point on, when she dies, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I did not see it coming.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the book would have stayed with me as much as had that impacted me less than it did, because like I went from being like, oh my god, I want to be this girl, to hey, this girl's dead. Like, potentially you might want to reconsider all of the things you idealize, 17-year-old Georgia.
Yeah.
And I think that this book, you know, we're going to discuss the romanticization of mental illness and all of that.
Sure.
But I think that it does a really good job of putting you in the headspace of Pudge, who really idealizes Alaska.
Yeah.
And then shows you, it suddenly twists on its head, and shows you the reality of her situation.
Yeah.
She goes from being somebody who, you know, jokes that she smokes in order to die, and that's like such a teenage and cool line, to suddenly dying, and like in a horrible way.
Yeah.
And all of her friends are left to deal with the grief. And I think that, you know, while my own mental health journey has been like a very long one, and a very like it's still in progress and all of that, I think that I kind of needed that in the time. I kind of needed, it was very popular during that period of time when I read it. You know, I was on Tumblr.
Yeah.
And Tumblr was terrible at the time for seeing mental illness as this like special gift, this thing that made you special and amazing and different. And it was like, well, if you continue down that path, it doesn't end well for you or anybody else around you.
Yeah.
And I think that's such an important message.
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely that sort of time. Obviously, you had that sort of message being put across that, like, mental illness is how art happens. It was also...
Yes.
I can't speak to how it is now because I'm not tuned in, obviously, to teenagers nowadays. But, like, when we were teenagers, I don't want to say, like, emo culture, but emo culture was a big thing, I think.
It was huge.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, like... obviously there's a healthy way to enjoy emo culture, but there's also a lot of romanticization of self-harm and suicide, which is problematic, and it's very easy to get drawn into it without realizing how problematic that can be, especially when you're a teenager.
Yes. So that's why I picked it, and I think that I think that John Green gets a lot of slack, and you can criticize, you can differ your opinion on authors and whether you enjoy their work or whether you think that they do their message particularly well.
Yeah.
But I'm on TikTok now, and there's a lot of hating on John Green characters, and I think that a lot of my personal opinion is that a lot of the people who criticize John Green have maybe read the blurb and the first couple of chapters of his books, and haven't, and that's kind of the point, isn't it? Is that so? Part of me's like, you know what, I haven't had an opportunity to discuss Looking for Alaska, and I think it gets a lot of bad rep, and so I'd like to discuss it.
Yeah. That's the thing. That's an advantage, I guess, of not being on TikTok. That I don't see that. But yeah, I think, like you say, you touched on something that a surface reading of John Green's characters is not how to read John Green's characters.
Yeah.
Because that's the whole point. Like, Jesus Christ, what do people think of Paper Towns?
Yeah. Oh, people do not think well on Paper Towns.
Yeah, because you're not meant to at the beginning. That's the whole point. You go on that journey with Q in the same way that in Looking for Alaska you go on the journey with Pudge.
Yeah.
I actually think Paper Towns does it better, but we might get into that possibly. No, that might just be a tangent.
That could be interesting.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this, if somehow this has found you, and you are not a John Green fan, but you haven't read it, like we said, it will take you a weekend. With some focus, it will take you a day. Give it a read. You might have the same opinion, but I don't know. Give it a go. See what you think once the tables have turned, either on Looking for Alaska or on Paper Towns.
Yeah,
because I think those two are the most similar.
I think as much as the books are great, I think if you're gonna get into John Green, you kind of said it earlier, the Looking for Alaska TV show and the Fault in Our Stars film are possibly a good way to get into it. And I think, like I said, I read them in order, and that maybe wasn't the best way. I honestly think reading The Fault in Our Stars is the best way, because I think The Fault in Our Stars is the most accessible. And then go back to Looking for Alaska.
Yeah.
Because I think being his first book as well, there's a lot that he got better at.
Yes. I definitely think that The Fault in Our Stars is more polished.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, out of the John Green books, for a quick tangent before we fully move on to Looking for Alaska.
Sure.
I think if I was to recommend 3, I don't know why, but if I was to recommend 3, I'd recommend Looking for Alaska, Fault in Our Stars, and Turtles All the Way Down. Because I think that they represent different things very well.
Yeah.
While I think that Paper Towns and Looking for Alaska are quite similar.
Yeah.
And people are probably either a fan of one or the other. They're going to be pulled into comparison a lot.
Yeah. It was in my synopsis of Looking for Alaska, I almost said that it's about him learning to imagine other people's complexity, which is more central to Paper Towns than it is to Looking for Alaska.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And The Abundance of Catherines, I think, is skippable.
Yeah, I want to read it again. I've only read it once. And I think
I've only read it once.
I enjoyed it well enough. It's just, there's something about it that's not memorable.
Yeah.
It's colder. I read the first page the other day, actually, and it reminded me that it's his only third person novel. and it feels like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
should we get
Alaska.
into the one we're actually talking about?
Yes.
Where did you want to start?
Well, let's start with the girl herself. Let's start with Alaska. So we kind of touched on the Manic Pixie Dream Girl with Summer.
Yeah.
But I think that this is a very different take on the Manic Pixie Dream Girl. Like,
yes.
On paper, you could say, oh, both 500 Days of Summer and Looking for Alaska are about a guy who has a Manic Pixie Dream Girl as a love interest, and he needs to learn that she's not perfect.
Yeah.
However, I think 500 Days of Summer is definitely lighter, and it's more about yes, most definitely lighter, and it's more about the relationship side of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl trope.
Yeah.
While Looking for Alaska is more about what is fundamental to this quote-unquote dream girl.
Yeah.
What is she actually like as a human being?
Yeah.
Because I think that because 500 Days of Summer, it has that distance with Summer. We kind of get glimpses as to who she is.
Yeah.
But Tom never really figures out who she is.
Yeah.
While this, I think, we get a lot more insight into who Alaska actually is underneath all of the manic and all of the pixie and all of the dream.
Yes. I think it's actually very interesting reading it again. This is the third time I've read it, I think, third or fourth. And I think the closer you read it, the better the book becomes for all the characters. But I mean, Alaska is possibly the best exemplification of that. There is a very surface reading of this book.
Yeah.
Where Alaska's representation is very Manic Pixie Dream Girl, very surface level. But when you really read it, knowing what she's going through, having read it before, you notice so many things that you don't the first time through that fleshes out her character and adds nuance to it.
Definitely. I think it reminds me, have you ever seen that advert? And I'm pretty sure that there's a couple of adverts like this,
sure.
Where they will, there's one I specifically got in mind where they show a love story kind of unfold between two high schoolers, and like they're writing on a library table,
and then there's a
messages.
School shooting,
and then there's a school shooting at the end, and then you're made to rewatch it and notice the guy behind them who's like being suspicious. And I think that when you first read this book, you know, and you're not expecting the twist, you kind of treat all of Alaska's problems and signs as kind of like quirky character traits, maybe.
Yeah.
And then when you reread it, you go, oh my God, how did nobody notice this?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the notes I had when reading it was Alaska really does make it clear that she's depressed.
Yeah.
She doesn't hide it. And later, like after she kills herself, Pudge and the Colonel are both like, where did it come from kind of thing. Like she joked about it, but she was never really, but like she did constantly make it clear that something was going on.
It's really tragic. And you can't, it kind of tells you in your own life that you've to really listen to people. Yeah. You know?
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to just dismiss what people are saying as a joke.
Yeah.
But that like Pudge and the Colonel really learned the hard way. And I think that they could have potentially ended they could have potentially ended the book with her death. I don't know who'd suggest that, but for example.
Sure.
But I think that the final part of the book with Pudge and the Colonel looking in hindsight has a really interesting perspective where you're suddenly looking back on conversations that you've had with people that you haven't noticed.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, that could have had deeper meaning, or was she just joking, or did that have deeper meaning, or was she just messing around?
Yeah.
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 So yeah, definitely a lot darker than 500 Days.
just a tad. Just a tad.
Just a touch.
Yeah, the other thing with Alaska that I think is interesting reading it this time round was reading it having experienced mental health problems versus reading it before having experienced mental health problems.
Yeah.
And how that does impact your reading. And it speaks to how it's a really well written character, that you can see how her joking has that.
She's crying for help, essentially.
Yeah. And it's the thing of, I think at one point either Pudge or the Colonel says, like, berates how she'd just kind of go off on one and be like really hot and cold and like not want the help, because there's some point that like Pudge wants to talk to her and she's just like kind of not having any of it, I think. Yeah. And it's so easy, as Pudge does, to just be like, fine, I won't then.
Yeah.
And be like, fine, if you don't want my help, like you don't need my help, fine. But that can be how it is. That like you want the help, but you don't know how to express that. And you like you can internally be like, no, I need it. And outwardly not be able to allow yourself to ask.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think this is possibly, oh no, this feels like a summary thing to say, maybe I shouldn't say it this near the beginning of the podcast, but this almost feels like the thing we've done so far that really going back and reading it has made a big difference to how I've experienced it.
Yeah.
More so than anything else so far. That my experience of this book has changed a lot from the first time I read it.
Yeah. To be honest, it hits me every time. I've tried to be a bit more restrained. As the years have gone on, I've tried to be a bit more restrained with how much I read. Books I like or movies I like and things like that, because I have a tendency to overdo it a bit.
Yeah.
But I do like to revisit this book occasionally and have a rethink about it. And notice things that I didn't potentially notice before, and understand, as I get older and as I get further away from Alaska's age, understand how she ended up in the situation she did.
Yeah.
And, and as a kind of trainee teacher of students that age, and even as an older adult, how can we help teenagers fully express the issues that they're going with, so that they don't end up in situations like this? And how, because I mentioned that, like, as a joke I kind of downloaded TikTok, and there's a common joke on my side of TikTok, at least, that it's a bit of a rebirth of Tumblr.
Yeah, right.
And that it has a lot of the same discord that Tumblr had.
Sure.
And one of those issues is the romanticization of mental illness.
Yeah.
Because I think
troubling to hear.
I think it's really difficult, because the reason that people fall into this trap, particularly teenagers, is that mental illness is one of those things that's so horrible, and it's so hard to go through, especially at such a young age.
Yeah.
And then there's all of these texts and all of these movies and books that claim that people who are different are people who are special.
Yeah.
And that you need mental illness in order to make good art. And that all of the good authors or all of the good painters or poets had alcohol problems or depression or any form of addiction, things like that. And I think that the temptation is to cling on to that, because it, if you're going through something dreadful, well, at least it means that I make good art. And at least it makes me an interesting person.
Yeah, it's a way to relate. and to find yourself in characters and to feel less alone because it's, oh, they are going through this too kind of thing. Like, there is almost a false sense of security in it. Oh, this is good because I can see myself here, but then you don't want to see yourself there too much. And it's why representations of these things need to be really carefully done, because when done wrong, suddenly someone's seeing themselves in this character, and if that character then, for example, kills himself and it's not fully explored how that happens and what went wrong for that to happen, then that's how you get these things perpetuating.
Yeah. And I mean, this is what happened. I didn't think about adding this, to notes, but this is what happened with 13 Reasons Why.
Yeah.
13 Reasons Why had a huge problem, and I've watched the first season, and I feel that's all you really need to watch, because that's the season that was adapted from the book.
Sure, yeah.
I have watched touches of the later seasons, but they kind of delve off that topic.
Sure.
But the first season of 13 Reasons Why had a real problem of romanticizing. It doesn't even seem like the right word for 13 Reasons Why, but kind of justifying why she committed suicide.
Yeah.
And being like, oh, she did it for this reason, this reason, this reason. And can you not see that this character went through enough that in reality you can understand and sympathize why she committed suicide?
Yeah.
And I think that the big ass problem with that is it means that other people feel as though they kind of follow her story and they follow her thought process.
Yeah.
Without being critical of it.
Yeah.
Without saying, okay, she was actually wrong. And I feel a bit nervous saying that Hannah Baker was wrong for some reason, but she was wrong.
No, this is the thing that I think that gets at. I didn't get through it. I got to like episode 5 and honestly, I just found it too depressing.
Yeah.
I didn't relate to anyone. I didn't like anyone. Like, I just... And I knew what it had done.
Yeah.
But I think stories like this, from what I understand, is you can get to the end of a story like that and feel like, yeah, you know what? I see why she did it.
Yeah.
And that is awful, but, like, there's something about telling a story like that where that is a really important thing to know and a really important thing for someone to understand. Because there's also like a flip side to it where people go the opposite way and blame the victim. And when people commit suicide, it's like, how selfish of them. And that is the instant reaction rather than any sympathy at all. And so I think it's important to understand how people get to that place. But particularly when you're targeting something towards teenagers, that's where it becomes irresponsible, I think.
Yeah.
You have to consider the impact that it's going to have on your audience.
Yeah. I think that the pitfall that it fell into was you have to delve this line, as far as I can understand. And I watched a good video on this, but I can't remember what the video was called. But you have to delve this line between making it so that the person who's like struggling with their mental health is understandable and sympathetic, and somebody who's going through the same things can relate to them.
Yeah. And
yet showing that this person has options.
Yeah.
That they perhaps don't decide to take, but that they have options. The problem with Hannah Baker is that she gets to a point where, spoilers for 13 Reasons Why, but she's had a point where she's been isolated from all her friends, so she's justified in not speaking to her friends. Like, her parents are distant and struggling with money, so she's not going to talk to her parents.
Yeah.
The student guidance counsellor dismisses her she's been raped, la la la. And so I imagine for somebody who's that young, it's like, oh well, there's no option for her. It's not as though there are options for her, but she doesn't take up on them.
Yeah.
There are no options for her.
Yeah.
And that's a very dangerous thought process for somebody who's in that mentality to have.
Yeah. Yeah, to be presented with. Yeah. And because like I say, like, it's not like those situations don't happen.
Yeah.
But do we need to be showing this to teenagers who might be going through similar things?
Yeah.
And might come to conclusions that, you know.
Yeah.
And the answer to that, I think, is no.
Yeah.
Bringing it back to Looking for Alaska, obviously, and I think this is something where, when you compare 13 Reasons Why the TV show to Looking for Alaska, the TV show, Looking for Alaska brings in what the book does, of really exploring her motivations and her feelings and the impact that it has, obviously, as well, and kind of comes at it from a lot of different angles to really paint a much fuller picture of, okay, you can see why she did it, if she did it, as well, because obviously you don't know if it's an accident or not. But if she did do it, you can understand why, but you can also see the hurt that it has caused, and you can see why she shouldn't have. And it is, I don't want to say it's tragic, because there's something romanticized almost about the word tragic, but it is, like, she could have, it shouldn't have happened.
No. Yeah, I think you're completely right. I think that Alaska, as a character, has, you can see you see her potential, and the only feeling that you kind of have after her death is that ultimately a young life has been cut short.
Yeah.
While with Hannah Baker's goal is to enact revenge on all of those she feels has contributed towards her misfortunes.
Yeah.
And she accomplishes that goal by committing suicide.
Yeah. I think, kind of drawing on the TV show again as well, the way that the TV show fleshes out the eagle and shows us more of the eagle really underlines that as well. Because maybe this is also being an adult now, but it is seeing that perspective on it and really feeling his perspective on it a lot more as well. Yeah. So
but you start.
Okay. So I've talked about how my reading of this has been my most drastically different from anything else we've looked back on so far.
Mm-hmm.
This includes my reading of Pudge, because when I first read this book, I did not like Pudge at all. And honestly, the event happened in the middle, and then it was such a slog to get through the rest of it for me, because I just wasn't with Pudge, and I just found it brought me down to read the rest of the book, because I think the way Pudge deals with it is valid and realistic to his character, but I found it tremendously unrelatable when I read it the first time.
See, I can be critical of Pudge.
Yeah.
But I still like him. I sympathise with his motivation. I think that everybody has kind of been a teenager who wants to seek a great perhaps. And like from that first chapter, I understand what he means and what he wants out of life.
Yeah.
And then I think that he falls in love, and and he's such a teenager.
Yes.
Yeah. He's such a teenager, and the thing with teenagers is they are, every human being is flawed, but I think that a lot of your I think a lot of your flaws are particularly highlighted when you're a teenager.
Yeah. Just to turn off all our teen listeners.
Yeah. But he's just got so much to learn. And he's so young. And I like the second half of the book because I think that a lot of TV shows and a lot of books, especially ones that are plot heavy, will have a character die, and characters aren't expected to grieve for that long.
Right.
You know, and I've watched things and I've had to catch myself while watching things where, you know, say character B dies in episode 5.
Yeah.
And if character A is still crying about it in episode 10 and is still being an inconvenience to the plot.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, come on now. Like, come on.
Yeah, because we as viewers want the action, don't we? We want the progression.
Exactly.
That particularly in a TV show or a film as well, more so than a book. I think because in a book you have a bit more time.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think Pudge is an interesting character in the way that he learns his lesson far too late.
Yeah.
Like, it would have been very easy for John Green to have had, for instance, Alaska getting into an accident, or her doing something really reckless that got her hurt, or for Pudge to go through something that made him realise that Alaska was being serious when she made jokes and things like that, and then for him to have come out of the book, like to have a climax where he, you know, he says to her, like, I've learnt my lesson, and for them to kind of live happily ever after. But it's not how life works, and he learns it far too late, and I feel so sorry for him.
Yeah.
And, you know, I talk, you know, you think back to high school relationships. Part of me wondered while reading it this time around, I was like, how long have they actually known each other? And, you know, is the amount of besottedness that he feels towards her, like, really justified? You know, when they're at her funeral and he says, I really loved her, and the Colonel says, I know. And I thought to myself for a second, I was like, you know, Colonel's known her a lot longer than Pudge has known her.
Yeah.
But, you know, everything when you're a teenager is stupidly intense.
Yes.
And I definitely had relationships which felt like great love stories, which when I look back only lasted for a couple of weeks. And especially in a boarding school scenario, because you know, you only had to, like, if you're in a tent, I'm trying to think, like, there was definitely situations where, you know, I was either like at camp with somebody,
sure,
or even something as small as a sleepover. Like, you know, I didn't go to boarding school, but I can tell from, like, the small experiences that when you are just stuck with people, like in a boarding school scenario, things just become intensified immediately, and you instantly become a community. And I think he really loves Alaska with all of his heart. Poor kid.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a thing, not just when you're a teenager either, it's a thing in any relationship when you fall for someone. It's a different kind of love. Like, to know someone for 3 years and love them is very different to being infatuated with someone for a matter of months. Not least because when you're infatuated with someone, your mind churns it over and over and over. Nothing's actually happening, but your mind just keeps going over it and cannot let it go. And it's a different kind of love.
Yeah.
It's a love that allows him, up until the point she dies and far past it, to not really understand her.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, like I say, when I first read it, I did not like Pudge. Reading it again, and reading it with more attention and more going into it looking to understand Pudge better.
Looking for Pudge.
In a way, I guess. I see how it happens. I see how he doesn't see her, I guess.
And I think that part of her, and I'm not usually one for the whole, the girl kind of creates the manic pixie dream girl within her, but
she definitely does.
She definitely does. She doesn't want, as much as she might be kind for help and as much as we can read into the times and we can notice the times that she's trying to communicate that she suffers with depression.
Yeah.
I think that she wants to be perceived the way that Pudge perceives her.
Yeah.
I think she really loves the fact that Pudge is infatuated with her.
Yeah, she properly flirts with him.
Yeah.
That is the case. Like, he doesn't imagine that.
No. She loves the infatuation, and she loves how they see her as this larger than life character. And so what he does is he goes searching for a great perhaps, and he finds somebody who is essentially made a character, like has made herself a character that fits a story where there would be a great perhaps.
Yeah.
He falls for it, God bless him.
Yeah. 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 I think that's perhaps an easier thing to recognise when you're not living it yourself, maybe, is where my different times coming at this book have influenced my different experiences of it, because I was maybe too much like Pudge when I first read this book. And it was actually interesting earlier when you said that you really saw yourself in Alaska, and it made me realise that we came at this book in very different ways.
Yeah.
From very different perspectives. Like, if you saw yourself in Alaska, I saw myself in Pudge, and then for him to... And then the second half of the book becomes really difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, because... And possibly... It's difficult because I don't want to undermine my experience reading it as a teenager, because that's when I was meant to read it. And so I think that's valid experience, but I don't know that I was ready to read it when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
Because I was too close to it. And so I got annoyed at Pudge for being enough like me that I could see myself in him as a character, but then after she died, being like, why are you acting like this? And not having that distance to be like, oh, maybe that is how I would act. And that's not a nice thing to see.
Yeah. I really love the Colonel as a character. I love that how he's set up, and I like how his and Pudge's relationship is like definitely friendship, and he definitely has this idea of, we don't rat on each other and we stick together, and when the weekday warriors like pull the stupid prank that almost gets Pudge drowned, they kind of band together in order to get revenge.
Yeah.
But it feels very juvenile, very superficial almost.
Sure.
And then when she dies, the two of them band together in just such a beautiful way.
Yeah.
And I think that it's very... I definitely don't think at the time when I first read it, but even now I'm not sure how much I see two male characters like openly expressing their grief with each other like so much.
Yeah.
And there's one of my favourite parts of the book is when the eagle comes and he asks them to potentially clear out Alaska's room because her family will be coming and she might have like put stuff in there that her family wouldn't want to see.
Yeah.
And the Colonel goes to go on his own, and Pudge says, I don't think I can do it.
Yeah.
And then the Colonel's standing outside the door, and Pudge comes, and the Colonel says, I knew you wouldn't make me do that on my own.
Yeah.
And it's just such a great display of male friendship and being just emotionally supportive of each other.
Yeah.
I think.
I mean, Pudge isn't emotionally supportive in that moment, though. He doesn't actually go to help the Colonel. He goes for some other reason. I can't remember why now. But he doesn't get up and walk with the intention of going with the Colonel. He just gets up and walks towards the door, and the Colonel takes that as, oh, okay, you're coming then. And then he goes because he feels bad not to.
Huh. Well, I've read that differently.
But that aside, I think you are right in that it's one of those things where extreme emotions force you to put aside the bullshit that comes with like an adolescent male relationship. There's ways you're meant to act and ways you're not meant to act. And I think that's the thing. She dies and they don't care about that. Yeah. They don't care about how they're meant to act. They act how they need to act. And I think that's what is so lovely about seeing their relationship after, because it's so honest. And I think that is a thing that you maybe don't see a lot of honesty and vulnerability in such a dark place, because it goes to such a dark place. Yeah. It just makes it that much more honest, I think, is the thing, isn't it? Yeah. Definitely.
And I think it's heavily contrasted with what happens to Takumi.
Right.
Because Takumi isn't really within that last, he's been quite heavily there throughout the entirety of the book until she dies, and then he kind of disappears.
Yeah.
And whether you kind of want to point the blame at Pudge and Colonel for that, or whether you want to point the blame at Takumi for that, I think that by the end of it, when Takumi leaves his letter, and he says, he felt by that point, Pudge and Colonel have, not dealt with their guilt and grief, but they've talked through it, and they've acknowledged their guilt and the ways that they were guilty and the ways that they weren't guilty.
Yeah.
And they've kind of come by the end of it to a resolution of that within themselves.
Yeah.
While Takumi's letter at the end suggests that he really hasn't.
Yeah.
That he still feels massively guilty. And he essentially has the same feelings that Pudge and Colonel had when she first died.
Yeah.
And I think that really shows the difference between banding together with somebody in your grief and being able to discuss it and dispute it and, share your darkest thoughts so that somebody else can go, well, don't be ridiculous, you shouldn't feel guilty, like it wasn't your fault.
Sure.
Compared to somebody who just becomes isolated.
Yeah.
And isn't able to get rid of those thoughts in any productive way.
Yeah. I think it also comes back again to the thing about not being able to look past yourself, not imagining other people complexly. It's...
Yeah.
Pudge and the Colonel only do because they live together.
Yeah.
If they didn't share a room, they wouldn't have.
Yeah.
But because they are, and because they share the experience as well to an extent, but because they are forced to, be together, they have to deal with it together. Yeah. And that obviously helps them then. But, I don't know, I think it's a hopeful thing at the end, though, with Takumi, because they will talk to him about it. You know that they will. And Pudge's reaction to it shows you that they will.
Yeah.
So, overall then, I feel like I've ended up talking more about how my perspective on it has changed than you have. Sorry about that. But
that's okay.
For you, how does it hold up now then?
Like I kind of hinted at, the older I get when I read it, the more tragic it becomes, because it's, you start off being the same age as her, or you start off being the same age as her and relating a lot to the characters and to her problems and the situation that she finds herself in, and relating to her. And then the older you get, and the more that you get past that, and the more that you realise and you have to like acknowledge the issues that you go through as a teenager.
Yeah.
And the further you come away from it, you know, there were things that were catastrophic when I was a teenager, and I think that those feelings were valid, but they're also 8 years away from me now, like at minimum. And I don't, you know, I don't have thought, I don't think about them. I don't think about those people much. Life has moved on, and I'm never gonna see them again.
Yeah.
And I've been able to like, when you're going through your 20s, you go through those things that like make you feel guilty or make you feel sad, or make you feel isolated, and you learn to communicate with people more and talk to people, hopefully.
Yeah.
And you know, and if you go to university or college, you meet a whole new set of people.
Which makes a massive difference.
Makes a massive difference. And rather than having to see the same people day in, day out, you know, you get to choose your family, you get to choose your community. And so like a long-winded answer to the question, you know, how has my perspective changed on it? The more sad I get, and I know she's not a real character, but the more sad I get that she never found out what was on the other side.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's my reading on it. The less I'm able to relate to her less, but I'm able to see the kind of tragedy, the true tragedy of it more.
Yeah. I think for me, kind of as I've alluded to throughout, I think this is a decent book when you're a teenager. For me, it's a better book when you're an adult. And maybe it's a thing where it's a better book when I'm an adult. My personal experience. And I wrote down a quote that I hadn't even remembered from previous readings of it, because it's not a famous one, because it's more of the last words. I can't remember whose last words it was. I didn't actually write that down. But it's the, I think it was War of the Presidents. And the quote I've written down is, "There's your labyrinth of suffering. We are all going. Find your way out of that maze." And Jesus Christ, for someone who struggled the most with depression after having like a 2-month-long existential crisis, God, does that hit me? In a way that it never could before I'd been through that. I think I'd say this book, if we're going to recommend this book to anyone, I would personally recommend this book to people who are in a good place now but have had difficulties with depression in the past. I think this is a wonderful book to read.
Yeah.
For exploring that. That was my experience, certainly. I don't know if I got too personal there.
No, you're good. I'm trying to think desperately of some sort of like knock joke or something to just like lighten the mood.
We were gonna trial kind of ending the podcast by talking about what we've been reading or watching or listening to this week, or since the last podcast. So what have you been consuming?
What have I been consuming? I've been reading On the Shortness of Life by Senka, which is a book that was written in the BC.
Right. Okay.
And what's really interesting about that is just how little humans have changed.
Right.
So it is, you know, it's a book about it's this idea that humans will constantly complain about how short their lives are.
Right.
But they will continually waste their time. And that life isn't that short, you just waste a lot of it, is essentially the idea.
Sure. That's interesting. I like that.
And I sent a paragraph. Let's see if I can find it. No, I can't find it. Essentially, there's this paragraph where he talks about people who say, I'm going to work until I'm 60, 70, and then I'm going to, live a life of pleasure.
Yeah.
And he's like, don't be an idiot. Like, you should, why are you waiting? He actually calls those people, idiotic. And I was like, oh, nothing's changed, Like...
Yeah. Go to seek your great perhapses.
Exactly. So, yeah, that's what I'm reading at the moment.
Nice.
What have you been consuming at the moment?
So, I just finished Becoming by Michelle Obama.
Oh, nice.
Which I started reading shortly after it came out, I think. And then just got 4 chapters in and stopped reading it for whatever reason. But picked it up. Been trying to read more non-fiction this year. So finished that. And that was really... It's a very good read. And one of the things that struck me when reading it was how much I saw myself in her, which is a really weird thing to relate to someone so different to you, but it's one of the wonderful things about it. Kind of like we were talking about last episode, actually, about how it's good to take in things from people who are quite different to you. It was really good. Kind of as good as you'd expect it to be, considering the hype. But it was really good. It was also, it occurred to me reading it at the end, I'm really glad I read it now that Biden is president.
Yeah.
Because it's a much less... I imagine the ending would have brought me down a lot more if I'd read it when it first came out. Because it's a hopeful ending, but it's also like we make all this progress and then Trump becomes president. But no, it was a very good read.
Great, I might give that a read.
Yeah, I would.
It's been on my list.
It's good. Yeah. So next time, we're back to my choice. And a few episodes back, I think H2O, you said that at some point we'll end up doing something where the other person just doesn't enjoy it.
Yeah.
So this week, or this time, might be that time. So we're going to be watching Get Over It, which is a 2001 film starring Ben Foster and Kirsten Dunst and Martin Short and a couple of other people you might be surprised to see in it. And we'll see what you think of that.
Okay, what's it? As long as it doesn't have Adam Sandler in it.
It does not have Adam Sandler in it.
Good. I refuse to watch any movie that has Adam Sandler in it.
Okay. Noted. So, thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.
You can get in contact with us in all the normal ways. We have our email, nostalgiasperspective@gmail.com. The website, still up and going. How do they actually contact us? Is there like a contact page on that? Because I always say you can contact us through that, and then...
There is a contact page on that.
Lovely. So go over there and send us a message, or email us, or leave us a comment on YouTube, or, I don't know, review on iTunes is what everyone says, and I haven't said that yet, so I'm going to say it. And we're looking at social media, possibly.
Yeah.
Bringing that in. So, I don't know, maybe search for Nostalgia's Perspective, see if anything comes up, because by the time it says, we might have started something, who knows? Hopefully.
Who knows?
And the name can't be taken, so hopefully.
No. Hopefully. Fingers crossed.
Mm-hmm.
Fingers crossed.
So, until next time.
Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.
That's how we normally end it.
I know.